So this is, I don't know if any of you was at our opening film, which was Cinema Paradiso. This could not be more different. It's completely the opposite. It's a movie that has virtually no script. It's a very, very light screenplay. Simon calls his scripts poems, and it's, I don't know, it's the opposite. So I can't imagine a better person to introduce the film. In fact, she will be here for a Q&A, but she also has prepared an introduction. And Giuliana Bruno. Giuliana is a professor at Harvard of visual environmental studies, and there she really pioneered the research on interdisciplinary research on visual arts, architecture, and media. So her work really dwells on the relationship of between film and cinema. And among her more important books are Atlas of Emotion, and then a book, Public Intimacy, I'm jet lag, and where she actually, one of the chapters of the book is devoted to the work of Malaysian Taiwanese filmmaker Simon Yang, who directed this film, and who we need to thank because he authorized the screening. So thank you, Simon Yang. Giuliana.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming on this Sunday afternoon to watch this film and share the experience of movie going. And I want to thank Giulia in particular for curating the series and for being here tonight. And it's a very appropriate series because, in fact, it doesn't speak about film, but it speaks about cinema and the difference between film and cinema. And it couldn't be better to lead up to the opening of the Sag Harbor Cinema to have this reflection. And I'm very excited about the cinema coming back. And so watching all these films about the architecture of cinema is just making me happier. I also feel like I've been living with this idea of the Sag Harbor Cinema coming back for about 10 years, since Giulia and my husband Andrew Fearberg, who I also want to thank, got involved in writing the first proposal for reimagining the theater 10 years ago, before the cinema burned down. So happy and looking forward to this, and what better way to do this is to lead into the opening of a great architectural cinema by thinking about the architecture of film. So this film, Simon Yang, Goodbye Dragon Inn, is in fact about nothing else but the observation of the activity of moviegoing and thinking about what the architecture of cinema is and what it does to us spectators. So it was made in 2003, and it takes place in the Dragon Inn, which was a movie theater, in fact, a movie palace in Taipei. And it is shot on the very last day of the existence of the cinema. So the film takes place on the moment in which this grand movie palace is decaying, falling apart, has very few spectators, and it's going to close. It was a prophetic film at the time, because it was talking about something that we have seen happening more and more, which is to say, grand movie palaces, movie theaters, the collective experience of watching a film together on a big screen in a large space has become something that is being replaced more and more by streaming, by watching things on our computers. And so watching this film, we actually really think about what it is that we have lost, and also how to replace or how to change that experience, and how we can actually make that social collective situation happen again by reopening things like the Sag Harbor movie theater. So it's actually a melancholic film, but a melancholic film that also allows us to reflect on the invisible architecture of the cinema. How many of us really think about this? Is it the same film we're watching, if we're watching it on a big screen, or if we're seeing it on our computer? What is a screen? How does the space affect our experience of the film? How does it change a film itself? So these are the questions that, in a sense, this film is asking us to think about, and to think about things like the invisible architecture of the screen. So to me, it actually takes us back all the way back to the idea of the screen as being an architecture. We often not really think about this piece of fabric here. We think of it just as the support of the images, or we don't think about the space and how it's centered in the space, how it sits in the space. But in fact, the screen as it really begins with architecture. What we really think of it as a technological thing was in fact not at all. The word screen started to be used in the early Renaissance, way before cinema was even invented. And it came from a Germanic root, screm, that also exists in Latin language. In Italian we say schermo, and in French we say écran. It's exactly the same root. So what was a screen in the Renaissance? It was a piece of architecture. It was a framed surface. It was a piece of fabric or paper stretched on a wooden frame, and it was positioned on windows to filter the light and to create an ambience, to create an atmosphere. It was also used in the house as a partition to make private space, so to create that experience that I like to call public intimacy in some way. And it's interesting that for a number of centuries, this idea of the screen as that kind of architecture was used. And the same word in the 19th century was used, was taken to mean what we now mean a screen to be, a plane for the projection of moving images, but also a fabric of light, something that where light is reflected and transpires, something that actually does create a mood. So this film, makes us think about this, and it also makes us think about what is around. How is the space around the screen affecting us, or how different it is to walk into a large theater where you're sitting with 2,000 people, where you can hardly see the screen, or in an intimate situation that will be very, very different. And in that respect, I think it has a particular significance in relation to the Sag Harbor movie theater, because Simon Young is talking about a particular type of movie theater, the movie palace. A type of movie theater that was developed in the 1920s and that continued to exist and continued to be made and faded out at a certain point. Now, that is the particular kind of architecture that the architect who designed the Sag Harbor Cinema actually made. So the movie, it's interesting to think about this in relation to, for me, to the Sag Harbor Cinema, because Simon Young is talking about the movie palace, and John Eberson, who built the Sag Harbor Cinema, designed the Sag Harbor Cinema in 1936, was in fact the architect of movie palaces. Eberson came from Europe. He was born in 1875 in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, what was the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and he studied architecture and engineering in Vienna, moved to the United States, and developed a particular type of movie palace. He's known to make something called the atmospheric movie palace. So, like Simon Young, Eberson understood that cinema creates an atmosphere, or that the activity of movie-going is about creating an affect, atmosphere in a sense of Stimmung, in a sense of rhythm, an affect, a sense of collectivity, a sense of being affected together by being together with perfect strangers watching a film that's also affecting us. And he wanted to emphasize the importance of the architecture in that respect. So not just thinking about the film, but thinking about the entire set of locales, the entire set of how you enter a theater, what spaces there are, how you sit, how is it organized around you. And he emphasized the kind of atmospherics that can be created by making things like movie theaters that look a bit like a Renaissance Italian garden, or a kind of Spanish revival architecture. And most importantly, he played with light. So when you walked into an Eberson theater, the lights were on, and then you would sit, and then they slowly would be dimmed down a little at a time, and then stars would appear on the ceilings, and you'll be slowly taken into this reverie that becomes you giving yourself away to this experience of a kind of hypnotic connection to the screen and to the space around and to the people around him. So this is the same architect that made this kind of cinema, the movie palace. It's the movie palace that you will see inside Indiana's film. And at a certain point, the movie palace becomes kind of obsolete. And it happens fairly soon, meaning with the Depression in the United States and with the change of style, Epperson started to make more streamlined, smaller theaters, modernist, deco types. And so in 1936, he designed the Sag Harbor Cinema. His son, Drew, was working with him. And I also want to mention a person who never gets any credit, and that's his wife. There's a woman in the story, Beatrice Lamb. She was an interior designer and an interior decorator, and she was the head of the so-called Michelangelo studio. And in the Michelangelo studio, she designed the interior of movie theaters. So it was a kind of collaboration in some way. So this particular type of theater was still in existence in Taipei, and in 2003, Tsai Ming-liang decided to set his film inside this kind of architecture that was by that time falling apart, due to the changes in the society, due to changes in the idea of social going to theater, collectivity, and the entrance of watching films in different formats on your own. So it's really thinking about all of these elements, but also about all of the architectural elements that are there, not just the amphitheater and the screen, but the corridors, where the projectionist is, the bathrooms. Bathrooms, very important in this film. It's a major place where the erotics, that the movie theater always had, that kind of sense of, people of different classes, of different genders being close together, gets transformed. So it really makes us think about how does the public or the public sphere becomes transformed into a moment where individuality, being solitary, individualism, and loneliness, urban loneliness, take over the space of this kind of grand, larger sense of collectivity. So returning to having that, in the Sag Harbor Cinema would be very nice, because indeed there is a need and a desire to really be together and to experience the film together, which we are happy to be doing tonight. Just a few words about Tsai Ming-liang himself. He's a Malaysian, as Giulia said, Taiwanese filmmaker, known as a kind of nouvelle vague or new way of the Asian cinema. A very interesting, in fact, filmmaker that could be characterized as one of the masters of slow cinema. What has become known as slow cinema is a kind of cinema that has very little action, almost no plot, minimalist, in many ways, and very, very kind of durational, right? So very long takes, along the time that almost seems real. Time is never real in cinema, but it can feel real even if it's not real, when it's like prolonged in some way. And it's asking you to be observers and participants. It's a sort of observational cinema. It's not asking you to identify with characters or with action or with plots. It's just asking you to experience the movie theater, to be there, to sort of enter in that atmosphere, so to speak. And it's a form of contemplative cinema, if you like, which has taken Tsai Ming-liang in a long career, beginning in film, into making now moving image installations that enhance that sense of duration in the film. So you will need some patience there, meaning there are perhaps 12 lines of dialogue in the whole thing, almost no camera movement, and the shots last over 30 seconds, which seems short, but in film time, it's long. So if you are still with us after all of this, Giulia and I will be very happy to have a conversation about the film and about Tsai Ming-liang and take questions from the audience. And so, as they used to say in the old movie palace times, enjoy the show.